October 17, 2012. The room smelled of sterilized soil and ozone. Dr. Alistair Finch stared at the genetic report. He was the head of the university's agronomy department, a man who had seen everything. A man who did not surprise easily. But he was silent now. A deep, profound silence that made his young graduate assistant nervous. Finch pushed his wire-rimmed glasses up the bridge of his nose. He read the final sequence again, then a third time. It made no sense. The sample was corn, Zea mays, but it was unlike any modern hybrid he had ever seen. It showed markers for drought tolerance he thought were lost, genetic pathways for nitrogen fixation that were ancient, primitive, and superior. He looked at the submission form. Sample 73B. Source, Jensen Farm. Alistair Finch felt something cold in his stomach. A memory from a lifetime ago. He had been a young loan officer then, fresh out of college himself, working at the county bank before he went back for his doctorate. He remembered a young man, quiet, determined, with grease under his fingernails. A young man named Arthur Jensen. Finch had looked him right in the eye, and he had told him no. He had told him he couldn't do it. He had told him farming was a fool's game for someone with no capital. He had refused the loan. And now, 40 years later, this report was on his desk. Proof of something impossible. Grown in the very dirt he had deemed a lost cause. The graduate assistant finally spoke. His voice was a whisper. "Is something wrong, doctor?" Finch slowly slid the report across the desk. He said, "This corn, it shouldn't exist. It's a ghost." The story of that ghost begins 40 years earlier, in a different kind of quiet room. A bank manager's office that smelled of stale coffee and responsibility. It begins with a refusal, a kindness that felt like a cage. This channel is for stories like that, stories about the people who were counted out, the ones who were told no, the ones who found a different way forward. If you believe those stories need to be told, subscribe. Because what happened to Arthur Jensen after that refusal is a lesson in patience and the quiet power of the dirt beneath our feet. The year was 1972. Arthur Jensen was 24 years old. He sat on a hard wooden chair, the same chair his father had sat in 4 years earlier, the day the bank took the family farm. Art felt the ghost of that day in the room. Across the desk sat Frank Miller, the bank's senior loan officer. Frank was a good man. Everyone in the county said so. He served on the church board, coached Little League. He had a kind face, etched with the concerns of his neighbors. He knew Art's family. He had known them for decades. He had gone to school with Art's father. Frank folded his hands on the neat desk blotter. He sighed. A heavy, paternal sound. "Art, I've gone over your proposal." He slid the thin folder back across the polished wood. It was a simple plan, a small loan. Just enough for a down payment on 80 acres of marginal land. The old McGregor place. Mostly clay and hillside. And enough for a used tractor, something reliable. Frank's voice was gentle, softer than Art expected. "Son, your father was a good man, a damn good farmer. He worked harder than any 10 men I know, and he still lost the farm." He leaned forward. "The game is different now, Art. It's not about hard work anymore, not really. It's about margins, input costs, hybrid seed that you have to buy every single year, fertilizer prices that go up every season. It's a mountain of debt before you even plant a single seed. I've seen it happen 100 times. Good families crushed under it. Art didn't speak. He just listened. He felt the weight of Frank's certainty. It was heavier than anger, heavier than contempt. It was the weight of genuine concern. Frank continued, "I can't put you in that position. I will not be the man who signs the paper that sends another Jensen into failure. I just won't do it." He looked at Art, his eyes full of sympathy. "It's for your own good, son. Go to the city. Get a trade. There's no future here for a man starting with nothing. This life, it'll break your heart." Art stood up. He nodded once. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He took his thin folder from the desk. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Miller." He walked out of the bank, into the bright afternoon sun. He didn't feel anger. He felt a deep, chilling loneliness. Proving someone wrong who hates you is a fight. Proving someone wrong who thinks they're protecting you, that's the loneliest work there is. He drove the 10 miles home in his old Ford pickup. The silence in the cab was absolute. He pulled into the gravel driveway of the small house they rented. His father, Samuel, was on the porch, sitting in a rocking chair, mending a piece of leather harness. Samuel had lost the farm, but he had not lost his dignity. He looked up as Art walked toward the porch. He didn't have to ask. He saw it on his son's face. Art sat on the top step. He stared out at the neighbor's cornfield. He told his father what Frank Miller had said. Every word, including the last part, for your own good. Samuel stopped his work. He laid the harness aside. He looked at his own hands. The knuckles were swollen. The skin was cracked like dry soil. Hands that had worked the same land for 50 years. He spoke softly. His voice was low and steady. "Frank's a good man. He sees the world through the pages of a ledger. He sees the debt. He sees the risk. He doesn't see the soil." He looked at his son. "They took the deed, Art. They put our name out of the county plat book. But they can't take the knowledge. They can't take what my father taught me, and what I taught you." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "They didn't take the dirt from under your fingernails. The knowledge is still yours. The dirt is enough." That phrase hung in the air. The dirt is enough. It was not a complaint. It was a creed, a statement of first principles. In that moment, Arthur Jensen made a quiet decision. He would not go to the city. He would not learn a trade. He would stay. He would find a way. He would prove that his father was right. The dirt was enough. But to work the dirt, you need tools. To get tools, you need money. To get money without a loan, you have to work for other people. Custom harvesting, baling hay, fixing fences. But to do that, he needed equipment, specifically a combine. He had no money for a new one, or even a decent used one. His chance came 2 months later, a notice in the paper, county auction, seized equipment and surplus. He went with $70 in his pocket, the savings from 2 months of odd jobs. The auction was a sad affair. The ghosts of failed farms were everywhere. Tractors with sun-baked tires, plows with rust on the mold boards, the tools of broken dreams. Then they brought it out, a Massey Harris 21 combine from the late 1940s. It was a ruin. The red paint was almost gone, replaced by a deep, scaly rust. The tires were flat and cracked. The engine was seized solid. The auctioneer didn't even try to sell it hard. He laughed. "Well, folks, here's a fine piece of scrap iron. Engine's locked up tighter than a drum. Who'll give me $50 for the heap?" Silence. Then a few chuckles from the crowd of farmers. They knew a lost cause when they saw one. "Do I hear 50? 40? 20 for scrap weight?" Art raised his hand. $60. His voice was clear. The auctioneer looked stunned. Then he grinned. "Sold. For $60 to the young man who likes a challenge." The crowd laughed, not unkindly. It was the laughter of men who knew better, the sound of shared, hard-won experience. Art paid his money. He spent the last of his cash getting a friend to haul it home. It sat in the yard behind the rented house, a monument to optimism. Or foolishness. His father walked around it. He ran a hand over the rusted metal. He didn't say it was a mistake. He just said, "Well, your grandfather had one just like it. Let's get to work." And so began the rebuild. It was not a montage. It was a slow, greasy, painful process. They pulled the 4-cylinder Continental engine. They soaked the pistons in a mixture of diesel and acetone for 2 weeks. Art's father showed him a trick, heating the block with a torch, just enough to expand the metal, then using a 10-foot pipe on a breaker bar to try and turn the crank. For 3 days, it didn't move. The neighbors watched from their trucks as they drove by, shaking their heads. There goes Art Jensen, his father's son, pouring good time after bad. That thing will never run. On the 4th day, with a sound like a gunshot, the engine broke free. Art and his father worked every night after their day jobs, under a single light bulb hanging from a tree branch. They rewired the magneto by hand, following a faded diagram in an old manual. They patched holes in the grain sieves, using sheet metal from a collapsed barn roof. They rebuilt the carburetor on the kitchen table, laying each tiny part on a clean cloth. One evening, a truck pulled into the yard. It was Gus, an old mechanic who ran a small shop in town, a man known for being grumpy and solitary. He got out of his truck holding a dusty cardboard box. He walked over to the combine. He didn't say hello. He just said, "My father owed your grandfather $50 from 1948. Never paid him back." He set the box down. "This makes us even." Inside were new gaskets, spark plugs, distributor points, parts for a Massey Harris 21 he'd had on a shelf for 30 years. He stayed for 2 hours. He helped Art set the timing. He showed him how to adjust the valves. He never smiled. But when he left, he said, "She'll run." A week later, she did. Art filled the radiator with water, put fresh gas in the tank, cranked the engine. It coughed, sputtered, and then roared to life. A cloud of blue smoke filled the yard. The sound was deafening and beautiful. Art's father put a hand on his shoulder. He was smiling. It was the first time Art had seen him truly smile in years. The machine was alive. Now, it had to be cleaned. Decades of dirt, chaff, and mouse nests were packed inside. While cleaning the grain hopper, Art found something strange. A small access panel near the bottom. It wasn't on the schematic in the manual. It had been welded shut. Curiosity got the better of him. He took a grinder to the welds. Sparks flew in the dim light of the hopper. He pried the panel open and reached inside. His fingers touched something soft. Canvas. He pulled it out. It was a heavy sack, made of thick, oiled canvas, stitched shut with heavy twine. On the side, in faded black ink, were 2 initials, S.J. Samuel Jensen, his grandfather. His hands trembled as he cut the twine. He opened the sack and poured a small amount into his palm. It was corn, but not like any corn he knew. The kernels were not yellow. They were a deep, shining red, almost purple. He recognized it instantly, from old hand-tinted photographs in a family album. Grandfather Jensen's Pride. A variety his grandfather had developed himself, an open-pollinated corn known for its resilience, its ability to thrive in poor soil and dry weather, a variety that had been wiped out, replaced by the modern high-yield hybrids. He looked in the sack. There were at least 10 bushels of seed, perfectly preserved, waiting in the dark for 50 years. He ran the kernels through his fingers, the smooth, hard feel of them. In that moment, he understood. This was the real treasure. Not gold, not cash, seed, independence, a second chance, a legacy he thought was lost forever. His father's words came back to him. The dirt is enough. Now he had the seed to prove it. Have you ever found something you thought was gone forever? A photograph, a letter, a piece of your own history, something that reminded you who you were and what you were capable of. If you have, drop a comment below. Tell us that story. Because what Arthur Jensen did next was not about farming. It was about honoring a discovery and rebuilding a future from a handful of seeds. He couldn't sell the corn. That would be a betrayal. And he couldn't eat it. He had to plant it. But he had no land, so he bartered. There was a widow down the road, Mrs. Gable. Her husband had passed, and she couldn't manage her farm alone. Her fields were full of weeds. Her combine was broken. Art made her a deal. He would fix her machine. He would harvest her 40 acres of soybeans. He wouldn't take a dime in cash. In exchange, he wanted the use of 5 acres of her worst land. A clay hillside, so steep you could barely walk on it. Land she hadn't planted in 20 years. She agreed. She thought he was crazy, but she needed the help. That spring, Art didn't use a planter. He planted the 5 acres by hand, just like his grandfather had taught his father, using a hand-jab planter, walking the rows, one seed at a time. He didn't use commercial fertilizer. He made a deal with a local dairy farmer. He cleaned out his barns in exchange for the manure. He spread it on the clay hillside himself, with a pitchfork and a wheelbarrow. The community watched. They called it Art's Folly. The same men who had laughed at the auction. They'd slow their trucks down as they drove by. Look at that fool on the hill, planting that red corn, by hand. He's going to starve. But the corn grew. As the summer wore on, something strange happened. A dry spell hit. The hybrid corn in the fertile bottomlands began to suffer. The leaves curled up in the afternoon heat. But on the hill, Art's corn stayed green. Its roots, bred for tougher times, went deep into the clay, searching for moisture. It grew taller than the corn in the valleys. Its stalks were thicker. When fall came, he harvested his 5 acres. He used the old Massey Harris. The machine ran perfectly. He took the grain to the county's scale. The yield, per acre, was almost identical to the expensive hybrid corn, grown on the best soil. With hundreds of dollars of fertilizer and chemicals, he had done it with free seed, free fertilizer, on land nobody wanted. He had done it with no debt. He saved every single kernel from that harvest. He now had over 500 bushels of seed, enough to plant a real farm, enough to start a revolution. He had proven his father right. The dirt and the right seed were enough. And this is where the story of Arthur Jensen becomes bigger. It stops being the story of one man and becomes the story of a quiet, patient war against the way things are. The next few years became a rhythm, a drumbeat of work and growth. 1974. He rented 40 acres of that same marginal land, planted it all in Jensen's pride. The yield was astonishing. He sold the grain as premium organic feed to a small but growing market nobody else was serving. At the end of the year, he walked into the owner's house. He bought those 40 acres. Cash. 1977. A dry year. His neighbor's crops were a disaster. His corn thrived. That winter, A struggling farmer offered him 80 acres, adjacent to his own. Art bought it. Cash. He bought a newer John Deere 4400 combine. Cash. He retired the old Massey Harris. He parked it in the barn, a monument to where he started. 1982. He now owned 320 acres, all paid for. No debt, no operating loans, no liens. He was free. He saw Frank Miller at the co-op one morning. Frank looked older, tired. He was processing emergency drought loans for other farmers. He just nodded at Art, a look of deep, profound confusion on his face. He was watching something he didn't understand. A man succeeding by breaking all the rules he held sacred. 1988. The Great Drought. The year the whole Midwest burned up. Fields turned to dust. Farmers went bankrupt in droves. The evening news showed pictures of cracked earth. But Art's fields were different. They were still green. He wasn't just growing corn. He was building soil. Using the old ways, cover crops in the winter, minimal tillage, rotating crops. Things his grandfather knew. Things the universities were just starting to rediscover. His farm was an island of green in a sea of brown. 1995. He owned over 1,000 acres. All of it purchased with money he earned from the soil. Cash. He started his own seed cleaning business on the side. He began selling his Jensen's Pride corn to a small network of organic farmers across the country. He didn't call it that. He called it Jensen Legacy Seed. 2005. He owned 2,000 acres. He was no longer a curiosity. He was a quiet legend. People didn't call it Art's Folly anymore. They drove by his farm slowly, with a kind of reverence. They didn't call him Art anymore. They called him Mr. Jensen. He never borrowed a single dollar from a bank. Not once. He had built an empire of independence. On a foundation of $60 and a handful of forgotten seeds. But the final chapter of his story, the reckoning, was still to come. It would arrive with another drought, worse than any that had come before. The year was 2012, the same year Dr. Finch was staring at a lab report. A crippling drought seized the heartland. It was worse than '88, worse than the Dust Bowl, some old-timers said. Day after day of searing heat, no rain. The modern hybrid corn, bred for perfect conditions, was failing catastrophically. It was a biological catastrophe and a financial one. A town hall meeting was called at the high school gymnasium. The place was packed. The mood was grim. Farmers stood with their arms crossed. Their faces were masks of anxiety. Bankers were there. Seed salesmen were there. Even the congressman for the district was there. They were all talking, but nobody was offering a solution. Then Dr. Alastair Finch from the university was asked to speak. He walked to the podium. He presented data on rainfall, on soil temperature, on the genetic brittleness of the corn varieties they all depended on. He confirmed what they already knew. The system was broken. Someone from the back yelled out, "So what do we do, Doc? What's the alternative?" Finch paused. He held up the lab report, the one he had looked at that morning. He told them about a ghost corn, a sample he had tested, a variety that showed incredible resilience, one that seemed almost immune to this drought. He said, "We need to find more seeds like this, varieties from our past. We need to rebuild our genetic diversity." The room was silent. They were listening, but it all sounded academic, hopeless. Arthur Jensen was sitting in the back row of the bleachers. He hadn't said a word all night. He just listened. Then Frank Miller's son, who now ran the bank, stood up. He pointed a finger toward the back. "Why don't you ask him? He seems to be doing just fine." "Ask Art Jensen." Every head in the gymnasium turned. 200 pairs of eyes, all focused on the quiet man in the back, the man they had once called a fool. Art didn't move. Then another man stood up. Slowly, painfully. It was Frank Miller himself. He was old now, frail. He walked with a cane. His voice, when he spoke, was thin, but it carried across the silent room. He said, "I was the man at the bank, 40 years ago. I was the one who told that young man he couldn't make it." He looked across the gym, his eyes locked with Art's. "I told him it was for his own good. I told him the old ways were finished. I told him the only way to farm was with debt and technology." A tear ran down his weathered cheek. I was wrong. He took a shaky breath. I wasn't protecting him. I was protecting my own certainty. I was protecting a system I believed in, and it was a system that was wrong. The silence was absolute. It was a confession, an apology 40 years in the making. Art Jensen finally stood up. He walked down from the bleachers and stood in the middle of the gymnasium floor. He looked at the faces of his neighbors, the sons and grandsons of the men who had laughed at him. He did not shout. He did not gloat. His voice was quiet, but everyone heard him. "The old ways were never gone, Frank. They were just waiting in the dark, waiting for us to need them again." He turned to the crowd. "I have seed, enough for every farmer in this room. I will give it to you, not sell it, give it." A gasp went through the crowd. He held up one hand. "On one condition. You have to learn to save your own seed. You have to learn to be free again. I will teach you. We will learn together." In that moment, the revolution that started in a dusty grain hopper finally came out into the light. What happened next changed that county forever. The Jensen Legacy Seed Cooperative was formed. That winter, Art didn't take a vacation. He held workshops in his barn. He taught his neighbors how to select the best ears for seed, how to test for germination, how to store the seed so it would be strong for the next spring. He taught them about cover crops, about soil health. He gave away not just his seed, he gave away his knowledge. The co-op grew. Within 5 years, it was a major force in the region, a hub for sustainable agriculture. Farmers were getting off the chemical treadmill. They were getting out of debt. They were taking control of their own farms again. Art used the profits from his own farm to create a foundation, the Jensen Foundation for Agricultural Independence. It funded scholarships at the state university, specifically for students studying soil science and heritage genetics. The first recipient of the Jensen Scholarship was a young woman named Sarah. Her family had almost lost their farm in the 2012 drought. She had been at that town hall meeting as a teenager. She had seen it all happen. The story now shows her in a university lab, the same lab where Dr. Finch once worked. She is sequencing the genetics of other heirloom seeds, searching for other lost ghosts. Art Jensen never married. He never had children of his own, but his legacy was secure. He had hundreds of farmers who were now his family, an entire generation of young people like Sarah. His knowledge was safe. It was back in the soil, where it belonged. If you visit that county today, you can go to the headquarters of the Jensen Legacy Seed Co-op. It's a beautiful, modern building, but in the lobby, sitting in a place of honor, is a rusty old Massey Harris 21 combine, restored to pristine condition, a piece of art, a piece of history. And next to it, under a glass case with a special light, is a simple, stained canvas sack with the initials S.J. stitched in faded black thread. Art's grandniece is the director of the co-op now. Sometimes she walks past the display. She places her hand on the cool glass, and she remembers. The story of the $60 combine was never really about the machine, and it wasn't even about the incredible luck of finding that seed. It was about recognizing value where others only saw scrap. It was about understanding that the most important things, knowledge, resilience, independence, cannot be bought or sold. They can only be earned and passed down. The most dangerous limitation is the one imposed by someone who genuinely believes they are protecting you. Certainty about another person's capabilities, delivered with kindness, is more damaging than outright hostility. Because it cannot be fought with anger, it can only be disproven, with decades of quiet, relentless work. Right now, somewhere in the world, a well-meaning person is telling someone what they can't do, for their own good. They are closing a door and calling it shelter. If this story reminds you of someone who refused to take no for an answer, someone who built their own door, share it with them. Subscribe for more stories of those who proved the world wrong, and comment below with a time you were told you couldn't do something, and tell us what happened next.